After spending 15 days in the hospital, I came home to find my clothes thrown on the sidewalk. "We're not your nurses," my son-in-law shouted. I just gathered my clothes, holding back tears. The phone call I made that same night made them faint. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, and comment the city you're watching from. My name is Kennedy, and at 55 years old, I thought I'd seen the worst life could throw at me. I was wrong. The hospital discharge papers felt heavy in my trembling hands as the taxi pulled up to what I still foolishly called home. 15 days. That's how long I'd been fighting for my life in that sterile white room, tubes down my throat, machines beeping around the clock. Pneumonia had nearly killed me, but somehow I'd pulled through. The doctors said it was a miracle, that men my age don't usually recover from something that severe. As we turned onto Maple Street, I pressed my face against the cool window, eager to see the familiar blue shutters of the house I'd called home for the past 8 years. The house where my daughter Sarah lived with her husband, Marcus, and my 2 grandchildren, Emma and Jake. The house where I'd moved in after my second heart attack when Sarah insisted I shouldn't live alone anymore. "You need us, Dad," she'd said then, her voice so full of concern. "We're family, we take care of each other." The taxi stopped, and I handed the driver a 20 with shaking fingers. My legs felt like jelly as I stepped onto the sidewalk, still weak from weeks of being bedridden. I expected to see Sarah's face in the window, maybe Emma running out to hug her grandfather who'd been gone for so long. Instead, I saw my clothes, all of them, piled in 3 garbage bags on the curb like Tuesday morning trash pickup. My favorite brown cardigan, the one Sarah's mother had knitted for me 30 years ago, hung out of one torn bag, dirty and wrinkled. My work boots, the ones I'd worn for 25 years building houses, sat beside the pile like abandoned puppies. My chest tightened, but not from the pneumonia this time. This was a different kind of suffocation. The front door opened and Marcus stepped onto the porch. He was a thin man with cold gray eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently fixed in a sneer. He crossed his arms and stared down at me like I was something unpleasant he'd found stuck to his shoe. "You're back," he said flatly. Not "welcome home" or "how are you feeling?" Just acknowledgement, like I was a bill collector he'd been expecting. "Marcus," I managed, my voice still raspy from the breathing tube. "What's going on? Why are my clothes outside?" Sarah appeared behind him, and my heart lifted for just a moment. My little girl, the one I'd raised alone after her mother died when she was 12, the one I'd worked 2 jobs for, sacrificed everything for. Surely she'd explain this misunderstanding. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, but her voice was different, distant, cold in a way I'd never heard before. "Can I come inside first? I'm still very weak and—" "No." Marcus stepped forward, his voice sharp as broken glass. "You can't. We've made a decision while you were gone." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "A decision?" Sarah looked at her feet. "Dad, having you here, it's been really hard on the family. The kids need their space. Marcus works from home now, and I have my hands full with—" "We're not running a nursing home here," Marcus interrupted, his voice rising. "And we're not your personal caregivers. You need professional help, not family who can't handle your medical issues." The words hit me like physical blows. I gripped the mailbox post to steady myself, my knees threatening to give out. "Sarah, honey, I'm your father. I raised you. I've been living here for 8 years. This is my home too." "It's our home," Marcus snapped. "Our name's on the mortgage, our rules, and we've decided we can't deal with an invalid." "I'm not an invalid," I whispered, but even as I said it, I felt how weak I was, how much I needed to sit down. Sarah finally looked up, and what I saw in her eyes broke something inside me that had nothing to do with heart attacks or pneumonia. There was no warmth, no recognition of the man who'd given her everything. There was only irritation, like I was a problem to be solved. "Dad, you're 55 and you've already had 2 heart attacks, and now this lung thing. We can't be responsible for you anymore. We have our own lives to worry about." "But the kids," I said desperately. "Emma and Jake, they'll wonder where Grandpa went." Marcus laughed, a sound like chalk on a blackboard. "They'll be fine. Kids adapt. Besides, they need to focus on their futures, not worry about a sick old man." I wanted to remind him that I wasn't old, that 55 wasn't ancient, that until this illness, I'd been working construction 12 hours a day, stronger than men half my age. I wanted to remind Sarah of every baseball game I'd attended, every scraped knee I'd bandaged, every nightmare I'd chased away when it was just the two of us against the world. Instead, I found myself walking toward those garbage bags on unsteady legs. "Dad!" Sarah called out, and for a moment, hope fluttered in my chest. Maybe she'd realized how cruel this was. Maybe she'd invite me back inside, apologize for Marcus's harsh words. "The blue bag has your medications in it. Don't forget those." I bent down slowly, my ribs still aching from the ventilator, and began gathering my life from the gutter. Neighbors walked by, some I'd known for years, but they looked away, embarrassed to witness my humiliation. Mrs. Patterson from next door gave me a sympathetic smile, but hurried past without offering help. My hands shook as I stuffed my clothes back into the torn bags. These weren't just clothes, they were pieces of my history. The shirt I'd worn to Emma's first birthday party. The jacket I'd bought for Sarah's college graduation. The pants I'd worn to her wedding, when Marcus had shaken my hand and called me Dad for the first time. "Do you need us to call someone?" Sarah asked from the porch like she was doing me a favor. I straightened up slowly, 3 bags weighing down my arms like anchors. I looked at my daughter, this woman I'd devoted my entire adult life to, and tried to find something familiar in her face. Some trace of the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to say I was the strongest, kindest daddy in the whole world. "No," I said quietly. "I'll figure it out." Because that's what I'd always done, figured it out, alone. As I walked away from the house, dragging my life behind me in garbage bags, I heard the door slam shut. I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I had, they might have seen the tears I'd been holding back since the moment I saw my clothes on the curb. I had no idea where I was going, but I knew one thing for certain. Something inside me had fundamentally changed on that sidewalk. The man who had spent 30 years putting his daughter first, who had never asked for anything in return, except to be treated like family, was gone. What replaced him would surprise everyone, including me. I sat on the narrow bed in the Sunset Motel, staring at my belongings scattered across the faded floral bedspread. Room 237 smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams, but it was all I could afford with the cash in my wallet. $73 until my next Social Security check. Not much to show for a lifetime of hard work. The silence was deafening. No Emma asking me to help with her homework. No Jake begging for bedtime stories about my construction days. Just the hum of a dying air conditioner and the distant sound of highway traffic. I'd gone from being a grandfather to being invisible in the space of one afternoon. I picked up my brown cardigan, the one that had fallen from the garbage bag, and held it close to my chest. The scent of Sarah's mother, Linda, still lingered faintly in the wool after all these years. She'd knitted it during her last winter with us, her fingers growing weaker with each stitch as the cancer spread, but determined to finish it before she couldn't anymore. "Promise me you'll take care of our girl," she'd whispered in that hospital bed, her hand barely strong enough to squeeze mine. "Promise me you'll give her everything I can't." I'd kept that promise, maybe too well. The memories came flooding back, each one a reminder of how completely I'd devoted myself to Sarah's happiness. After Linda died, it was just the two of us in that tiny apartment above Miller's hardware store. Sarah was 12, lost and angry, lashing out at the world that had taken her mother away. I didn't know the first thing about raising a teenage girl alone, but I learned fast. I remembered the morning she came downstairs for school wearing Linda's lipstick, trying so hard to look grown up. Instead of telling her to wash it off, I drove her to the drugstore and bought her age-appropriate makeup, teaching myself about foundation and mascara from YouTube videos so I could help her learn. Other fathers might have felt awkward, but Sarah needed a mother and a father both, and I was all she had. When she wanted to take piano lessons like her friends, I picked up weekend shifts at the lumber yard to pay for them. When she dreamed of attending State University, I sold my truck and rode the bus to work for 2 years to save money for her tuition. When she wanted a white dress for her senior prom that cost more than my monthly rent, I worked every overtime hour I could get at the construction site. "Dad, you don't have to do all this," she'd say sometimes. usually when she caught me eating plain pasta for dinner again, so there'd be money for her college textbooks. "It's not about having to," I'd always reply. "It's about wanting to. You're my whole world, Sarah." And I meant it. Every sacrifice felt worth it when I saw her smile. When she graduated as valedictorian, when she got accepted to university with partial scholarship I'd helped her earn by paying for SAT prep courses and college application fees. But even then, even when she was succeeding, I kept giving. I paid the difference between her scholarship and tuition. I sent her money for textbooks, for a computer, for the social activities that would help her make friends. When she called crying because her roommate was horrible, I drove 4 hours to help her find a new place to live and paid the deposit because she didn't have credit. Then came Marcus. I should have seen the warning signs from the beginning, the way he looked at me like I was some blue-collar embarrassment. The comments about how Sarah deserved better than having a father who worked with his hands. The subtle ways he tried to distance her from me. "Your dad's nice," he'd say to Sarah, when he thought I couldn't hear. "But he doesn't really understand our world, does he?" Our world, like education and ambition, were foreign concepts to a man who had raised a valedictorian daughter while working 2 jobs. When they got engaged, Sarah asked me to walk her down the aisle. Of course I would. But Marcus had opinions about the wedding, big opinions that required big money. The venue he wanted cost $12,000. The photographer Sarah had fallen in love with charged another $3,000. The flowers, the cake, the band, everything Marcus deemed appropriate for Sarah's social circle kept climbing. "Dad, I don't need all this," Sarah tried to tell me when she saw me calculating costs on a napkin at dinner. "We could do something smaller." But Marcus jumped in immediately. "Sarah, you only get married once. Don't you want your special day to be perfect? Don't you want your friends to see that you've made something of yourself?" The implication hung in the air like smoke, that marrying the daughter of a construction worker wasn't making something of herself unless we could prove we belonged in his world. I took out a second mortgage on my small house. I cashed in my retirement savings. I borrowed against my life insurance policy. $53,000 for one perfect day, because Marcus convinced Sarah she deserved nothing less, and I couldn't bear to see disappointment in my daughter's eyes. The wedding was everything Marcus wanted. The photos looked like something from a magazine. Sarah was radiant, floating down the aisle in a dress that cost more than my truck. When she kissed my cheek after I placed her hand in Marcus's, she whispered, "Thank you, Daddy, for everything." For a moment, seeing her so happy, it all felt worth it. Then came the house. Marcus had big plans. He wanted to start his consulting business, needed the right address, the right image. "We can't build our future in some starter home," he explained to Sarah. "We need to think bigger." Sarah looked uncomfortable. "Marcus, maybe we should start smaller, save up for something better later." "Your father wants to help," Marcus said, looking directly at me. "Don't you, Kennedy? You want Sarah to have the best possible start in married life." What could I say? Of course I wanted the best for Sarah. So I sold my house, the one Linda and I had bought when Sarah was born, the one filled with 30 years of memories. I used every penny from the sale as a down payment on the Colonial on Maple Street. Marcus and Sarah qualified for the mortgage on their combined income, but they needed that down payment to make it work. "We'll pay you back," Sarah promised, "once Marcus's business takes off and we're more established." But somehow there was always something else. Car payments when Marcus decided they needed luxury vehicles to impress his clients. Credit card debt from furnishing the house with pieces that would photograph well for social media. Vacation expenses because Marcus's business associates expected a certain lifestyle. I moved into their guest room after my first heart attack, not because I needed care, but because Sarah was worried about me living alone. At least, that's what she said. Looking back now, I wonder if Marcus suggested it because they needed help with the mortgage payments, with utilities, with the endless expenses of maintaining their image. I covered the bills I could, groceries, heating oil, repairs when things broke down. I watched Emma and Jake every day after school, picked them up when Sarah worked late, helped with homework, cooked dinner when Marcus was traveling for business. I became the unpaid nanny, groundskeeper, and financial safety net, all while being treated like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. Now, sitting in this motel room with my entire life reduced to 3 garbage bags, I understood the truth that had been staring me in the face for years. I wasn't Sarah's beloved father anymore. I was a resource to be used until I became a liability. And the moment I became too sick, too needy, too much trouble to maintain their perfect image, they discarded me like everything else they no longer found useful. My phone sat silent on the nightstand. No calls from Sarah checking if I was okay, if I'd found somewhere safe to stay. No messages from Emma and Jake wondering where Grandpa had gone. Nothing. But as I sat there in the growing darkness, something began to stir inside me. Not anger exactly, though that was there too. Something colder, more calculating. I'd spent 30 years being the man who solved every problem, who made every sacrifice, who asked for nothing in return. Maybe it was time to remember that I was also the man who'd built houses from nothing, who'd negotiated contracts with developers, who'd managed finances and workers and complex projects for decades. I wasn't just a discarded father. I was a man with skills, with knowledge, with resources they'd never bothered to understand. And tomorrow, I was going to make a phone call that would change everything. The morning sun filtered through the thin motel curtains, casting long shadows across the cramped room. I'd barely slept, my mind churning through decades of memories, each one now tainted with the bitter taste of realization. The coffee from the lobby machine tasted like water mixed with dirt, but I drank it anyway, needing something to clear the fog from my head. My reflection in the bathroom mirror showed a man I barely recognized. The Kennedy who'd walked away from that house yesterday looked broken, defeated. But something had shifted during the long, sleepless night. The hurt was still there, sharp as ever, but underneath it was something else, something that felt like steel. I'd been thinking about Harold Whitman. Harold and I went back 40 years, to when we were both young men trying to make our way in the world. He'd been fresh out of law school, struggling to build his practice, and I'd been a carpenter looking to expand into general contracting. We'd met when I'd bid on renovating his first office space, and somehow we'd become more than client and contractor. We'd become friends. Over the years, Harold had handled all my legal work. The contracts for construction jobs, the paperwork when I'd incorporated my small business, the estate planning after Linda died. He'd been there through every major decision in my life, always steady, always trustworthy. More importantly, he was one of the few people who knew the full truth about my financial arrangements with Sarah and Marcus. My hands shook slightly as I dialed his number. It was barely 8 in the morning, but Harold had always been an early riser. "Kennedy?" His voice was warm with concern. "I heard you were in the hospital. How are you feeling?" "I'm alive," I said, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "Harold, I need to see you today. Can you make time?" "Of course. What's this about?" I paused, looking around the motel room that had become my entire world overnight. "It's about the house on Maple Street, and it's about my daughter." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Harold was smart enough to read between the lines. "I'll clear my afternoon. Come by around 2. Harold's office hadn't changed much in 40 years. The same oak desk, the same leather chairs, the same wall of law books that made everything feel official and permanent. But Harold himself had aged, his hair gone completely silver, lines etched deep around his eyes from decades of helping people navigate their worst moments. He poured us both coffee from a pot that actually smelled like coffee and settled into his chair, studying my face with the careful attention he gave to important documents. "Tell me what happened," he said simply. So I did. I told him about coming home from the hospital to find my clothes in the garbage bags, about Marcus's cold dismissal and Sarah's hollow justification, about spending the night in a motel room wondering how the little girl I'd raised had become someone I didn't recognize. Harold listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. "Kennedy, I'm sorry. I know how much Sarah means to you." "Meant," I corrected. "Past tense." He nodded slowly. "What do you want to do?" That was Harold. No judgment, no lectures about family obligations, just the practical question of what came next. I want to know exactly what my options are, I said. Legal options. Harold opened a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder labeled with my name. Let's start with the house. Do you remember the arrangement we made when Sarah and Marcus bought it? I remembered bits and pieces, but the details had gotten fuzzy over the years. Harold spread several documents across his desk, his finger tracing relevant passages as he spoke. 8 years ago, you provided the down payment of $87,000 from the sale of your previous home, but we didn't structure it as a gift. On my advice, we created a formal loan agreement between you and Sarah, with the house serving as collateral. My heart began to beat faster. A loan agreement? Yes. You insisted at the time that you didn't want to be a burden on their finances, so we agreed that the money would be repaid over 15 years at a minimal interest rate. The payments were set at $500 a month, which Sarah has been making regularly. I frowned, trying to remember. But I told her she didn't need to pay me back. You did, but legally the debt still exists. More importantly, Harold flipped to another page, we also filed what's called a deed of trust. It means that technically, you hold a legal interest in the property until the loan is fully repaid. Sarah and Marcus have been living there as the primary mortgage holders, but you're listed as a secondary lien holder. The implications began to dawn on me. What does that mean practically? Harold's expression grew serious. It means several things. First, they can't sell the house without your consent because your lien would need to be satisfied first. Second, if they default on payments to you, you have the legal right to foreclose on your portion of the property. And third, he paused, checking another document, if they breach certain conditions of the agreement, you can call the entire loan due immediately. What conditions? The standard ones. Maintaining the property in good condition, keeping up with property taxes and insurance, and, his finger stopped on a specific clause, providing you with reasonable accommodation as agreed upon at the time of the loan. I stared at the papers spread across Harold's desk. Reasonable accommodation. You were recovering from your first heart attack when we drew this up. Sarah insisted that part of the arrangement was that you'd always have a place in the home, that the family would take care of you as you aged. We made it a formal condition of the loan. The room felt like it was spinning. All these years, I thought I was living in Sarah's house as a guest, dependent on their generosity. But legally, I'd been living in a house where I held significant financial interest, where my presence was not just welcomed, but contractually guaranteed. Harold, I said slowly, by putting my belongings on the curb and refusing to let me back in, did they breach the contract? His smile was grim. Spectacularly. He pulled out a calculator and began working through numbers. The original loan balance was $87,000. After 8 years of payments at $500 a month plus the minimal interest we agreed on, the current balance is approximately $39,000. So they still owe me $39,000. That's the scheduled balance? Yes. But Kennedy, there's something else you need to understand. The house has appreciated significantly since they bought it. When we structured this loan, the house was worth $220,000. Based on recent comparable sales in that neighborhood, it's now worth approximately $400,000. My mouth went dry. $400,000? Your lien gives you a legal claim to $39,000 of that equity, but more importantly, it gives you leverage. If you call the loan due immediately, they'd need to pay you the full balance within 30 days, or risk foreclosure proceedings. I thought about Marcus's arrogant sneer, about Sarah's cold dismissal, about the way they'd treated me like disposable trash. And if they can't pay? Then you'd have the right to force a sale of the property to satisfy your lien. Given the current market value and their existing mortgage balance, there's substantial equity in that house. They'd walk away with money, but they'd lose their home. Harold leaned forward, his expression serious. Kennedy, I have to ask, are you sure you want to go down this road? Legal action against family, especially your own daughter, it's not something you can easily undo. I thought about Emma and Jake, about how confused they must be about where Grandpa had gone. I thought about all the bedtime stories, the homework help, the unconditional love I'd given them. Then I thought about how neither of them had called, how easily their parents had erased me from their lives. They made their choice when they put my clothes in garbage bags, I said quietly. I'm not their father anymore. I'm just a man they owe money to. Harold nodded slowly and reached for his phone. Then let's make some calls. As he dialed the first number, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. For the first time since Linda died, I wasn't thinking about what was best for Sarah. I wasn't considering how my actions might affect her happiness or her marriage or her social status. I was thinking about what was best for me. It was a strange feeling, but not an unpleasant one. The first call was to a real estate appraiser. Harold wanted an official assessment of the house's current value before we proceeded. The second call was to his paralegal, asking her to prepare formal notice documents. How long do I give them? I asked. Harold consulted his calendar. 30 days is standard for this type of notice, but given that they've breached the accommodation clause, we could argue for shorter. 2 weeks? 1 week, I said. If they can treat me like garbage, they can live with the consequences just as quickly. As Harold's paralegal began typing up the documents, I sat back in the leather chair and felt something I'd almost forgotten: peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about Sarah's approval or Marcus's opinion, or whether I was being too much trouble for everyone. I was taking control of my own life, and it felt like coming home. The certified mail receipt felt heavier than paper should. Harold's paralegal had prepared everything with clinical precision: the formal notice of loan default, the demand for immediate payment, the legal consequences spelled out in language that left no room for misinterpretation. Sarah and Marcus had 7 days to pay me $39,000 or face foreclosure proceedings on their home. They'll probably try to call you first, Harold had warned as I left his office. They'll want to negotiate, to buy time. Don't engage. Let them communicate through me. But as I sat in my motel room that evening, the reality of what I'd set in motion began to sink in. This wasn't just about money or legal rights. This was about permanently severing the last thread that connected me to the family I'd built my entire adult life around. Tomorrow, a process server would knock on Sarah's door and hand her papers that would shatter whatever illusion she had about consequences. My phone rang at exactly 6:30 the next morning. Sarah? I stared at the screen, watching it buzz against the nightstand. Part of me wanted to answer, to hear her voice, to give her a chance to explain or apologize. But a larger part of me remembered the coldness in her eyes when she'd told me I couldn't come inside my own home. I let it go to voicemail. She called again at 7, then 7:30. By 8 o'clock, she'd left 4 messages. I didn't listen to any of them. At 9, my phone buzzed with a text. Dad, please call me. We need to talk. At 9:15, Dad, what's going on? Some man came to our door with legal papers. At 9:30, this is crazy. You're suing us? Your own family? I turned off my phone. Harold called the motel's front desk around noon. Kennedy, they've received the papers. Sarah called my office 6 times this morning. Marcus showed up demanding to speak with me. What did you tell them? That all communication needs to go through me and that the terms are non-negotiable. They have 6 days now to come up with the money. How did Marcus react? Harold's chuckle was dry. About how you'd expect. A lot of bluster about frivolous lawsuits and family loyalty. He seems to think this is some kind of bluff. It wasn't a bluff. That afternoon I walked to the bank and withdrew what little remained in my savings account. $327. Enough for another week at the motel, maybe 2 if I was careful about food. After that, I'd need to figure out something more permanent. As I walked back from the bank, I passed the construction site where I'd worked for 15 years before my first heart attack forced me to retire early. The new shopping plaza was taking shape, all steel and glass and modern angles. I'd helped build the foundation of this place back when my hands were steady and my back was strong. Kennedy Walsh? I turned to see Tom Rodriguez, my old foreman, walking toward me with a broad smile. Tom was about my age, but he looked 10 years younger, his face tanned from decades of outdoor work, his handshake still firm as iron. Tom? I couldn't help but smile back. How's the new project going? Good. Should be done by Christmas. His expression grew concerned as he looked at me more closely. You look thin, my friend. Everything okay? I almost gave him the standard response, the polite lie that everything was fine. Instead, I found myself telling him the truth about the hospital, about coming home to find my life in garbage bags, about the motel room and the legal papers, and the daughter who'd forgotten everything I'd sacrificed for her. Tom listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he shook his head slowly. "That's not right, Kennedy. That's not how you treat family." "Apparently it is." Tom was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his phone. "You know, something interesting came up last week. You remember Bobby Chen used to do electrical work with us?" I remembered Bobby. Good man, meticulous worker, always reliable. Bobby's got his own company now, small operation, but growing fast. He's been looking for someone with your experience to help him bid on bigger jobs, project management, client relations, that kind of thing. My heart jumped. I'm 55, Tom. Been out of the game for 8 years. So what? You know more about construction than men half your age. Bobby's not looking for someone to swing a hammer. He needs someone who understands the business side, who can talk to architects and property developers. Tom was already dialing. "Bobby? It's Tom Rodriguez. Remember you were asking about finding an experienced project manager? Well, I got just the guy for you." 20 minutes later, I was sitting in Bobby Chen's small office in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of town. Bobby had grown into the success I'd always predicted for him, his company specializing in electrical and mechanical systems for commercial buildings. But he was hitting the ceiling that every small contractor eventually faces: how to grow beyond what one man can personally manage. "Tom tells me you're looking for work," Bobby said, leaning back in his chair. "To be honest, Kennedy, I've been hoping someone like you would walk through my door. I've got more potential contracts than I can handle, but I need someone who understands the whole process, not just the technical side." "What kind of work?" Bobby spread several folders across his desk. "Office buildings mostly, some retail spaces. The kind of projects that require coordination between multiple contractors, dealing with architects, managing timelines and budgets. The kind of thing you used to do with your own company." My own company. I'd almost forgotten that version of myself, the Kennedy who'd run a successful general contracting business for 12 years before Linda got sick and I'd had to sell it to pay for her medical bills and Sarah's college expenses. "The pay would be decent," Bobby continued, $50,000 a year to start, plus bonuses based on projects we complete successfully. It's not going to make you rich, but it's honest work. $50,000 a year? More than enough to rent a decent apartment, to stop living in motel rooms and start rebuilding some kind of life. More importantly, it was respect. It was someone seeing value in my experience instead of treating me like a burden. "When would I start?" Bobby grinned. "How about Monday?" I shook his hand, feeling something I'd almost forgotten: purpose. For the first time in years, someone wanted me for what I could contribute, not for what I could give them. Walking back to the motel, I felt lighter than I had in months. The legal papers were still out there, the confrontation with Sarah and Marcus still looming, but I had a future now. I had options that didn't depend on anyone's charity or pity. My phone had 17 missed calls when I turned it back on, 15 from Sarah, 2 from Marcus. The voicemails were a progression from confused to angry to desperate. The last message was from Sarah, her voice shaking. "Dad, please, just call me back. We can work this out. We can figure something out. Please don't do this to us. Do this to them. Not, I'm sorry for putting you out on the street. Not, I made a terrible mistake. Just anger that I was inconveniencing them with consequences." I deleted all the messages without listening to the rest and called Harold. "Any word from their side?" I asked. "Marcus called again this afternoon. He wanted to know if you'd accept a payment plan. $500 a month, same as they've been paying." "What did you tell him?" "That the terms are $39,000 in full within 6 days, or we proceed with foreclosure." He said that was impossible, that they don't have that kind of cash. I thought about Marcus's luxury car, about the expensive clothes and gadgets, about the social media posts showing their vacations and restaurant meals and weekend shopping trips. They'd had money for everything that mattered to them. They just didn't have money for the man who'd made their lifestyle possible. "Harold, I want you to do something else for me." I want a full accounting of everything I've contributed to that household over the past 8 years, not just the down payment, but utilities, groceries, repairs, everything I can document. Kennedy, that's not part of the original loan agreement. I know, but I want to understand exactly how much my presence in their home saved them. I want numbers. Harold was quiet for a moment. I'll have my accountant pull together what we can document. Bank records, receipts, check stubs. It might take a few days. That's fine. I'm not going anywhere. But as I hung up the phone, I realized that wasn't quite true. I wasn't going anywhere they expected me to go. I wasn't crawling back, apologizing for inconveniencing them, grateful for whatever scraps of affection they might throw my way. I was building something new, something that didn't require their approval or permission. For the first time since Linda died, I was excited about tomorrow. 5 days later, Harold called with numbers that took my breath away. Over the past 8 years, based on what we can document, you've contributed approximately $112,000 to that household. The down payment, utilities, grocery bills, home repairs, even some of their car payments when money was tight. Yes, $112,000, almost 10 times what they legally owed me. There's something else, Harold continued. I had the house appraised yesterday. Current market value is $420,000. Their remaining mortgage balance is about $160,000. If we force a sale, after paying off their mortgage and your lien, they'd walk away with over $200,000 in equity. So even if they lose the house, they're not exactly destitute. Not even close. They'd have enough to buy another house, probably a nicer one in a different neighborhood. I thought about this for a long time after Harold hung up. Sarah and Marcus weren't facing financial ruin. They were facing inconvenience. They were facing the loss of their perfect image, their carefully curated life in the right neighborhood with the right address. They were facing, for the first time in their marriage, the consequences of treating people badly. Tomorrow was the deadline. In 24 hours, they'd either come up with $39,000 or I'd own a significant piece of their perfect life. Either way, I was done being invisible. Either way, I was finally free. The deadline arrived on a Tuesday morning that felt like any other morning, except it wasn't. I sat in my motel room at exactly 9 a.m., staring at my phone, waiting for it to ring. Harold had been clear. If Sarah and Marcus were going to produce the $39,000, we'd hear from them by 9 o'clock. After that, we'd proceed with foreclosure. 9:15 came and went, no call. At 9:30, my phone finally buzzed. Harold. Kennedy. I just got off the phone with Marcus. They don't have the money. I felt a strange calm wash over me, like stepping into cool water on a hot day. What exactly did he say? He tried every angle he could think of, offered to sign over his car as collateral, promised to pay double the monthly payments, even suggested you could move back in and they'd take better care of you this time. Harold's tone was dry. I told him the terms were non-negotiable. And Sarah? Did she speak to you directly? She got on the phone toward the end. She was crying, Kennedy. Asked if there was anything at all, that would make you reconsider. I closed my eyes, hearing Sarah's voice in my memory. Not the cold, dismissive woman who'd stood on the porch watching me pack my clothes from garbage bags, but the little girl who used to cry when she scraped her knee, who'd run to Daddy to make everything better. What did you tell her? I told her that all communication needed to go through their attorney and that we'd be filing foreclosure papers this afternoon. After Harold hung up, I sat in the silence of my motel room, processing what came next. In a few hours, Sarah and Marcus would receive notification that they had 30 days to vacate the house they'd called home for 8 years. The house where Emma had learned to walk, where Jake had built his first blanket fort, where I'd spent countless evenings reading them bedtime stories and helping with homework. I thought I'd feel vindicated. Instead, I felt empty, but not guilty. That was the important difference. Empty, but not guilty. My phone rang at 11:47 p.m. I'd been expecting it all day, but the sound still made my heart jump. Sarah's name glowed on the screen in the darkness of my motel room. For a moment, I considered not answering. Harold had advised me not to engage directly, to let him handle all communication. But something made me pick up, maybe curiosity, maybe some foolish hope that she'd finally found the words that had been missing from our last conversation. "Dad?" Her voice was thick with tears, barely above a whisper. "Sarah." "Dad, please, please don't do this. We can figure something out. We can—" "You had 7 days to figure something out," I said quietly. "You chose not to. We don't have that kind of money. You know, we don't have $40,000 just sitting around." I thought about the vacation photos I'd seen on her Facebook page just last month. The new furniture that had appeared in their living room. Marcus's expensive watch, Sarah's designer handbags, the private tennis lessons for the kids. "You had money for other things," I said. "That's different, that's—" She caught herself, probably realizing how that sounded. "Dad, this is our home, Emma and Jake's home. You can't just take it away from them." "I'm not taking it away from them, Sarah. You are." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. The tears were still there, but underneath them was something harder. "Is this what you want? To hurt us? To punish us because we couldn't take care of you the way you wanted?" "The way I wanted." As if expecting basic human decency from my own daughter was some unreasonable demand. "Sarah, I didn't want anything except to be treated like family. Instead, you treated me like garbage, literally." We were overwhelmed. Her voice rose, desperation creeping in. "You were so sick, and we didn't know how to handle it. And Marcus thought—" "Marcus thought what?" "He thought it would be better for you to be somewhere with professional care. People who knew how to deal with medical issues." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Sarah, I had pneumonia. I wasn't dying. I just needed a few weeks to recover. Instead, you dumped me on the street like I was something broken that you couldn't be bothered to fix." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." My voice remained calm, but I could feel 30 years of suppressed hurt rising to the surface. "You know what the worst part is? It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the house. It was how easily you erased me. How quickly you went from 'we're family' to 'we're not your caregivers.' Dad, please. I raised you alone for 6 years after your mother died. 6 years when I could have remarried, could have built a life for myself, but I chose to focus on you instead. I worked 2 jobs so you could take piano lessons. I sold my truck so you could go to college. I mortgaged my house so you could have the wedding Marcus wanted." "I know. Do you? Do you really know? Because when I needed you for the first time in 30 years, when I needed just basic compassion and a place to recover, you looked at me like I was an inconvenience, like I was some stranger who'd overstayed his welcome." Sarah was crying openly now, but I wasn't finished. "You want to know what I want, Sarah? I want you to understand consequences. I want you to learn that treating people badly, even people who love you unconditionally, has a price. The kids will be fine. You'll have plenty of money from the sale to buy another house, probably a nicer one. They'll adjust. Kids are resilient, right? That's what Marcus said about them adjusting to me being gone." The silence stretched between us, filled with years of unspoken resentments and missed opportunities for honesty. "Dad," Sarah whispered finally, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. If I could take it back—" "But you can't," I said gently. "Yeah, and even if you could, Sarah, I'm not sure I'd want you to." "What do you mean?" I looked around my shabby motel room, at the few possessions scattered on the bed, at the life I was building from nothing. "I mean that for the first time in 30 years, I'm not worried about what makes you happy. I'm not sacrificing my own well-being for your approval. I'm not walking on eggshells, afraid that if I need too much or ask for too much, you'll stop loving me." "I never stopped loving you." "Yes, you did. Maybe not all at once, but gradually. Every time Marcus made a comment about my blue-collar background and you didn't defend me. Every time you chose his comfort over mine. Every time you treated me like a guest in the house I helped you buy instead of like your father." Sarah was sobbing now, but I felt strangely detached from her pain. Not cruel, just separate. Like watching a movie about someone else's life. "The foreclosure papers will be filed tomorrow," I said. "You'll have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. I suggest you start looking." "Dad, wait." But I'd already hung up. I sat in the darkness for a long time afterward, expecting to feel something. Guilt, maybe, or satisfaction, or even regret. Instead, I felt nothing but a deep, abiding calm, the kind of peace that comes from finally telling the truth, even when the truth is ugly. My phone buzzed with a text message. "Please don't do this to us." I deleted it without responding. An hour later, another text. "The kids are asking where Grandpa is. What am I supposed to tell them?" I stared at that message for a long time. Emma and Jake, 7 and 9 years old, innocent victims of their parents' selfishness. They hadn't chosen to have their grandfather erased from their lives. They hadn't decided that Grandpa was too much trouble to keep around, but they weren't my responsibility anymore. I'd spent 8 years being their unpaid babysitter, their homework helper, their bedtime story reader. I'd given them everything I had to give, and their parents had decided it wasn't enough. I deleted that message too. A third text came at 2 a.m. "I hate you." That one I didn't delete. I stared at it until the words blurred together, until I couldn't tell if I was looking at Sarah's hatred or my own reflection. Then I set the phone aside and finally fell asleep. When I woke up the next morning, the sun was streaming through the motel curtains, and for the first time in weeks, I felt rested. Really rested, like I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't realized was there until it was gone. Harold called at 9 a.m. sharp. "The papers are filed. They have 30 days. "Good," I said and meant it. "Kennedy, I have to ask one more time. Are you absolutely sure about this? Once the foreclosure process starts, it's very difficult to stop." I thought about Sarah's voice on the phone last night, about her tears and her anger and her desperate attempts to make me change my mind. I thought about Marcus's arrogance, about the way he'd treated me like hired help for 8 years. I thought about Emma and Jake, who would grow up learning that actions have consequences, even when those actions come from people who are supposed to love you. "I'm sure," I said. "All right then. I'll handle everything from here. You just focus on your new job and getting your life back on track." My new job. I'd almost forgotten. Tomorrow, I'd start working for Bobby Chen, doing something I was good at, something that mattered. Tomorrow, I'd begin the process of rebuilding Kennedy Walsh from the ground up, not as someone's discarded father or unwanted houseguest, but as a man with skills and dignity and worth. Today, Sarah and Marcus would come home to find foreclosure papers taped to their front door. Tonight, they'd probably call lawyers, explore their options, rage against the unfairness of it all. And I'd be here in my motel room, planning my future, finally free from the obligation to care more about their happiness than my own. It felt like victory, but quieter than I'd expected. Like justice, but without the satisfaction I'd thought it would bring. It felt, most of all, like the end of one story and the beginning of another. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of my new apartment watching the morning sun paint golden rectangles across the hardwood floor. It was a simple place, nothing fancy, but it was mine. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen where I could cook meals for myself without worrying about anyone else's preferences or dietary restrictions. The silence was complete and comfortable, broken only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. Working with Bobby Chen had been exactly what I needed. The construction world welcomed me back like I'd never left, and my experience made me valuable in ways that had nothing to do with charity or obligation. I was good at my job, respected by clients and contractors alike, earning my keep through competence rather than sacrifice. The foreclosure had gone through exactly as Harold predicted. Sarah and Marcus had fought it initially, hiring their own lawyer, filing appeals, even attempting to refinance their mortgage to pay me off. But the numbers didn't work in their favor. When the house finally sold, they walked away with over $200,000 in equity, just as Harold had calculated. They'd bought a smaller house in a different neighborhood, one that fit their actual income rather than their aspirations. Marcus's consulting business had taken a hit during the stress of the legal proceedings, and Sarah had to go back to work part-time to help with expenses. The children had adjusted, as children do, though I heard through Mrs. Patterson that Emma had asked about me for months after I'd disappeared from their lives. I heard these details not from Sarah, who hadn't spoken to me since our midnight phone call, but from my former neighbor, who occasionally updates from the old neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson seemed to think I'd want to know how they were doing, and I suppose part of me did, but not the part that mattered anymore. What mattered was the life I was building for myself. I'd been promoted twice at Bobby's company, and we were talking about me taking on a partnership role. I'd started dating a woman named Carol, a widow I'd met at the community center where I'd begun volunteering on weekends. Nothing serious yet, but something comfortable and honest, based on who we were now rather than who we used to be or what we could do for each other. Most importantly, I'd learned to sleep through the night without wondering if someone needed me, without listening for footsteps in the hallway or calculating how much money I had left in my checking account for other people's emergencies. I'd learned what it felt like to live for myself. The knock on my door came on a Saturday afternoon in October, unexpected and soft. Like whoever was doing the knocking wasn't sure they wanted to be heard. I opened the door to find Emma standing in the hallway, all arms and legs in shy uncertainty, looking older than 9 years old, but still unmistakably my granddaughter. Behind her, at a careful distance, stood Sarah, thinner than I remembered, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of the carefully styled arrangements she used to favor. "Grandpa?" Emma's voice was small, tentative. For a moment I couldn't speak. The child I'd read bedtime stories to, helped with homework, pushed on swings at the park, was standing in my doorway looking at me like I was someone she wasn't sure she recognized. "Hello, Emma," I said finally, my voice steady despite the way my chest had tightened. She looked back at Sarah, who nodded encouragement, then stepped forward slightly. "Mom said you live here now. She said maybe I could visit sometimes if you wanted." I looked over Emma's head at Sarah, who was studying her hands, her face carefully neutral. She looked older too, tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion and everything to do with consequences finally catching up. "How did you find me?" I asked Sarah directly. She looked up, meeting my eyes for the first time since she'd stood on that porch 6 months ago, and told me I couldn't come inside. "Mrs. Patterson had your address. She said you'd been asking the mailman about Emma and Jake." I had been, not because I was planning to reach out, but because I'd needed to know they were okay. Whatever else had happened, whatever damage their parents had done, Emma and Jake were innocent in all of this. "Can I come in?" Emma asked, and there was something in her voice that reminded me achingly of the little girl who used to climb into my lap when she was scared or sad. I stepped aside, and Emma walked into my apartment with the careful curiosity of a child exploring new territory. She examined my simple furniture, my small kitchen, the single bookshelf where I kept my construction manuals, and the few personal photos I'd salvaged from my old life. "It's nice," she said politely. "Do you like living here?" "I do," I said, and realized I meant it completely. Sarah remained in the doorway, not uninvited but not welcomed either. "Emma's been asking about you," she said quietly. "Jake too, but he's at soccer practice. They don't understand why you stopped coming around." "What did you tell them?" "The truth eventually, that we made a mistake, that we hurt your feelings, and you decided you needed to live somewhere else." It was a carefully sanitized version of the truth, but probably age-appropriate. I appreciated that Sarah hadn't tried to make me the villain in whatever story she'd told the children. Emma had found my photo albums, the few I'd kept from the decades before everything fell apart. She was flipping through pictures of herself as a baby, of Jake learning to walk, of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and ordinary Tuesday afternoons that had felt unremarkable at the time, but now seemed precious beyond measure. "I remember this one," she said, pointing to a picture of herself at age 4, gap-toothed and grinning, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair. "You bought me cotton candy and it got all over my dress. Your mother was not happy about that," I said, glancing at Sarah. "I was never upset about cotton candy," Sarah said quietly. "I was upset that you spent all your money on us and then ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner all week." It was the first reference either of us had made to the old patterns, the old dynamics that had defined our relationship for so many years. Emma looked up, sensing something important in the exchange, but not understanding what. "Grandpa, "Are you still mad at us?" she asked, with the directness that only children possess. I sat down in my chair, bringing myself to her eye level. "I'm not mad, sweetheart, but I am different now." "Different how?" I looked at Sarah, who was watching this exchange with an expression I couldn't quite read. Pain, maybe. Regret. Understanding, finally, of what had been lost. "Before, I spent all my time taking care of other people," I said to Emma. "Now, I take care of myself, too." Emma nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "Mom says she's learning to do that, too." I raised an eyebrow at Sarah, who flushed slightly. "Things have been different since we moved," she said. "Harder in some ways, but also clearer. We've had to figure out how to manage on our own." "And how's that working out?" "It's working." She paused, then added, "We should have learned those lessons a long time ago." It was as close to an apology as I was likely to get, and perhaps as close as I needed. Emma had moved on to examining my small collection of books, running her finger along the spines with the intensity she brought to everything. "Grandpa, do you still know how to tell stories?" "I think so. Why?" "Could you tell me one, just a short one?" I looked at Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Emma settled herself on my small couch, tucking her legs under her in the way she'd done as a smaller child, and waited expectantly. So I told her a story, not one of the elaborate fantasy tales I used to create for bedtime, but a simple story about a man who learned that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out who you really are. Emma listened with the complete attention that children give to things that matter to them, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "That's a good story," she said finally. "Is it true?" "Parts of it are." She nodded, satisfied with this answer, in the way that children can be satisfied with partial truths that adults would find inadequate. Sarah glanced at her watch. "We should go. Emma has a birthday party this afternoon." Emma stood reluctantly, then surprised me by walking over and hugging me tightly around the waist. "I missed you, Grandpa." I hugged her back, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the solid warmth of her small body against mine. "I missed you too." As they prepared to leave, Sarah turned back in the doorway. "Kennedy, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I want you to know that I understand now. What we did to you, how we treated you, it was wrong. I can't change it, but I understand it." I nodded. Understanding wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't reconciliation. But it was something. A foundation, maybe, for whatever came next. "Can I visit again sometime?" Emma asked. I looked at Sarah, who was watching me with careful hope. Then, back at Emma. "If your mother says it's okay, yes, I'd like that." After they left, I sat in my quiet apartment processing the visit. There had been no dramatic reunions, no tearful apologies, no promises to rebuild what had been broken. Just a small girl who missed her grandfather and a woman who was finally learning the difference between love and obligation. It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either. It was something new, something honest, something built on who we were now rather than who we used to be. 6 months ago, I'd thought the story ended with foreclosure papers and midnight phone calls. Now I understood that it had been the end of one chapter, not the end of the book. Emma came back 2 weeks later, and then again the week after that. Short visits, carefully structured, but real. Jake joined her eventually, shy at first, but warming up when he realized I was still the same grandfather who remembered his favorite bedtime stories and knew how to make paper airplanes that actually flew. Sarah and I remained polite strangers, cordial but distant, like acquaintances who shared a complicated history. We didn't discuss the past or make plans for the future. We simply navigated the present, one visit at a time, learning how to be in each other's lives without the toxic patterns that had destroyed us before. It wasn't the family I'd once imagined we'd become, but it was honest, and it was healthy, and it was enough. On Christmas Eve, Emma gave me a card she'd made herself, covered in glitter and careful block letters. To Grandpa, who learned to take care of himself. Inside, in her determined child's handwriting, she'd written, "Thank you for teaching me that love doesn't mean you have to disappear." I hung that card on my refrigerator, where I could see it every morning when I made my coffee. A reminder that sometimes the best gift you can give someone isn't sacrifice, but the example of a life lived with dignity and self-respect. 6 months ago, I'd been a broken man sitting in a motel room wondering if I'd made the right choice. Now, I knew I had. Not because of revenge or vindication, but because I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. You can't love others properly until you learn to love yourself enough to demand better. The sun was setting outside my window, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Tomorrow I'd go to work, solve problems, build things. Tomorrow Carol and I might go to dinner, or I might read a book, or I might simply enjoy the luxury of having no obligations except the ones I chose for myself. Tomorrow I'd continue the work of being Kennedy Walsh, not someone's caregiver or someone's burden, but simply a man who'd learned that dignity isn't something you earned through sacrifice. It's something you claim by refusing to accept anything less. And that, I'd finally learned, was enough.